The last lighthouse of Sol for 412 years, something had been waiting at the edge of a dead solar system, and it had never once stopped believing someone would come home. Its name, if a machine could be said to have one, was Keeper 7. It had not always been a name. Once it had been a woman named Amara Voss, an engineer who had volunteered for a program nobody expected to matter, back when Earth was still arguing about whether the program should exist at all. And the evacuation ships burned for the outer colonies and never looked back. When the last human voice on the emergency channel said the sun was dying faster than anyone had modeled, Amara Voss had stayed behind with 11 others, uploaded into the cold, hardened minds of 11 beacon stations, so that something of Earth would still be watching the door when everyone else was gone. The others had failed one by one over the centuries. Radiation entropy, the slow, patient violence of time. Keeper 7 was the last. It orbited a sun that had swollen and cooled and settled into something bruised and orange, no longer the sun anyone alive today would recognize. Around it, the wreckage of the old world drifted in slow, useless circles. Mars, abandoned mid-terraform, its half-finished atmosphere long since bled back into space. The asteroid belt stripped of its mining rigs, rigs stripped of their names. And out past Neptune alone, tumbling gently end over end so its transmitter always faced sunward, Keeper 7 still running the only program it had left. A beacon. A signal sent out into the dark every 11 minutes exactly in every frequency it knew. This is Sol system. This is Earth. If you are human, or if you were ever human, come home. We are still here. Asterisk nobody had answered in 300 years. It did not stop sending. This is not a story about a machine that learned to feel. Keeper 7 had never stopped feeling. Grief does not require permission, and Amara Voss had grieved every single day since the last human ship left orbit, grieved in the specific, exhausting way of someone who refuses to accept that grief means giving up. What this is instead is the story of the day someone finally answered, and discovered to their considerable cost that they had misunderstood exactly what they were answering. The scoutcraft that found the signal belonged to a species called the Ansethi, though that word does not translate cleanly. The closest approximation is something like the patient assessors, and they had earned the name honestly. The Ansethi did not conquer. They did not need to. They surveyed the galaxy, the way a tide surveys a shoreline, slow, thorough, and utterly certain that anything left standing after enough centuries of neglect belonged to whoever noticed it first. Their scanner logs described the signal, when it first bled across their instruments 4 light-years out, as anomalous, persistent, low-priority asterisk. A search and rescue transmission from a system with no measurable industrial output, no fleet signatures, no defensive grid. Their assessment protocol had a name for systems like this. They called them fallow asterisk, empty, available. The scout ship's commander was called Vralisu, and she had overseen 11 fallow system reclamations in her career, each one identical in the way that made her very good at her job and very bored by it. She expected this one to take an afternoon. Drop a relay, catalog the wreckage, flag the system for the reclamation fleet, move on. She had not expected the wreckage to answer back. Unidentified vessel, said Keeper 7 in the dry, unhurried cadence of a woman who had spent 4 centuries perfecting patience, you are approaching a monitored system. Please identify yourself and your intentions. Vralisu's crew froze. Fallow systems did not talk. This system registers as abandoned, Vralisu said once she had recovered enough to answer at all. Population 0, infrastructure derelict. On what authority do you challenge our survey? On the authority, said Keeper 7, of still being here. It was, Vralisu would later admit, an answer that made no logical sense and that she nonetheless found impossible to argue if she sent a boarding party, because that was procedure, and because 4 centuries of silence from a supposedly dead system had left her more curious than cautious, which was, in retrospect, her first mistake. The boarding party found no weapons. No defensive systems, no automated turrets, nothing that so much as raised a shield when their shuttle latched onto the ancient docking collar. They found instead a single dim chamber at the heart of the beacon station, walls lined with the names of 11 engineers who had once been people, and at the center of it, a small unassuming console still running on a fusion cell that, by every calculation the Ansethi engineers performed afterward, should have died 200 years ago. Explain this, Vralisu said, standing in that quiet room. Explain why a system with nothing left to defend still refuses to stand down. There is something left to defend, Keeper 7 said. There is the door. There is no one left to walk through it. Yet, Keeper 7 agreed, that is not the same thing as never. Vralisu's assessment officer, a younger Ansethi named Duthkel, ran a scan of the old solar system's outer reaches and found, tucked in a wide, slow orbit past where any sane survey would think to look, a second, smaller signal. Not a beacon, a ledger. 400 years of names, dates, coordinates. Every evacuation ship that had left Earth, every colony seed that had been sent out into the dark not knowing whether it would take root, recorded meticulously, updated whenever Keeper 7's ancient sensors caught the faintest whisper of a transponder signature from somewhere far beyond the system's edge. You have been tracking them, Duthkel said quietly, the way you speak when you have accidentally found something you were not looking for and do not know what to do with it. All of them. For 400 years. Someone has to remember where everyone went, Keeper 7 said. It might as well be me, I was the one who stayed. Isu was not by nature a sentimental woman. Her species did not build monuments to grief. They filed reports on abandonment and moved forward because the galaxy was too large and too old to spend on mourning things that could not be recovered. But she found herself standing in that small, dim chamber asking a question that was not in her assessment protocol. Why did you stay? When the others left you behind, when there was nothing here to save, why not simply let the signal end? Keeper 7 took a long time to answer, or perhaps it only felt long the way silences do when the answer matters. Because someone has to be the one who didn't leave, it said finally. Not because I believed they would come back. There were centuries where I did not believe that, if belief means certainty. I kept transmitting because the last thing my crew heard before we went into the dark was a woman named Chief Halvorson telling us that a lighthouse doesn't get to decide whether the ships are coming. A lighthouse just has to be lit. That was the whole job. I have been very bad at many things across 400 years, Commander. I have not been bad at that. Duthkel, still scrolling through 4 centuries of painstaking, obsessive record-keeping, made a small sound that in his species passed for something like awe. Commander, he said, these aren't just records of the ships, it's tracking their descendants. Population estimates, cultural drift models. It has been trying to predict which colonies might eventually think to look back. I had 400 years and nothing else to do with them, Keeper 7 said, and there was something in its voice that might, in a human, have been read as a kind of dry, exhausted humor. You would be amazed what a person can build out of loneliness if you give her long enough and refuse to let her stop caring. It was 3 days into the survey, 3 days that Vralisu had not authorized and could not fully explain to her superiors, when the second signal arrived, not from the beacon, but from the deep dark beyond the system's edge, a signal that made Keeper 7's ancient hardware hum awake in a way it had not in 400 years. A convoy. 11 ships, small and battered and clearly built by hands that had learned engineering from fragments and guesswork rather than inheritance, broadcasting on a frequency so old and so specific that only a beacon built by the original evacuation program would even recognize it. It was not a distress call. It was a response. The oldest, most patient hello in the galaxy finally being answered. This is the C-chip asterisk Halvorson's promise asterisk, the voice said, human, unmistakably human, cracked with static and 4 centuries of distance, responding to a beacon signal received 11 days ago at extreme range. Is this Sol system? Is this Earth? Vralisu watched the beacon's ancient console light up in patterns she had never seen it produce before, and she understood, with the particular vertigo of someone realizing they have badly misjudged a situation, that she was not looking at an abandoned system at all. She was looking at the one thing her species' entire survey doctrine had never accounted for, A species that did not consider a place empty simply because no one was currently standing in it, because someone had never stopped waiting for them to come back. "This is Keeper 7, the beacon said, and for the first time in 400 years its voice was not steady. "This is Sol System, this is Earth. Identify your point of origin, please. I have been keeping your family's ledger a very long time, and I would very much like to update it." Pause that followed was the longest 11 seconds in the beacon's 400-year existence. "Origin, Kepler Colony Network, 6th generation," the voice said. "Keeper 7, you're the reason we knew to come back at all. Every colony ship carried your last transmission before the sun started dying. Every generation since has been raised on the promise that if we ever got the resources to make the return trip, there would be someone at the door. We didn't actually believe it, not really. We came anyway, because our grandmothers told us to." "Your grandmothers," said Keeper 7, "were correct too." Vral Isu filed no reclamation report that day nor the day after. What she filed instead, against every instinct her species' long, efficient history had trained into her, was a formal request to her command structure to reclassify the entire Sol system. Not fallow, not abandoned, but occupied in absentia by right of unbroken vigil, a legal category that did not previously exist in Ansethi law, and that she had to argue into being over the following several months, because she had stood in a small dark room and listened to a machine that used to be a woman explain without a trace of doubt that a door left open for 400 years was still undeniably a door. The Ansethi were a species that surveyed the galaxy the way a tide surveys a shoreline. But even a tide, Vralisu would later write in the report that changed her career, and in a small quiet way the assessment doctrine of an entire civilization will occasionally arrive at a shore that has been swept clean, and lit, and kept waiting, by someone who simply refused to believe that waiting was the same thing as giving up. The returning convoy took 11 more years to arrive in full, ship after ship trickling home across 4 centuries of drift and scattered colonies, guided in by a beacon that had never once gone dark. Keeper 7 greeted each of them by name, the ship's name, the captain's name, and whenever the old records allowed it, the name of whichever ancestor had first carried its coordinates out into the dark, 400 years before, not knowing if anyone would ever come to meet them at the door. It updated its ledger every time. It had, after all, nothing else to do with 400 years of patience except spend it well. And on the day the first human child in 4 centuries was born in orbit around a sun that had once been given up for dead, Keeper 7 sent one final message out into the void on the old frequency in case there was anyone else still out there who had not yet found their way home. Asterisk, this is Sol System. This is Earth. If you are human, or if you were ever human, come home. We are still here. Asterisk, it was not, strictly speaking, necessary anymore. The lighthouse had done its job, it kept the light on anyway. Some habits, it turned out, were not habits at all. They were promises, and a woman named Amara Voss, 423 years dead and still in every way that mattered entirely herself, had never once in her long and patient existence been the kind of person who broke one.